That's nice. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to class today. Thank you for joining me. Whether you're watching live or you're watching the recording, I appreciate you watching. Thank you for joining me today. So today we're finishing up our discussion about Git and subsequently GitHub. What I'd like to do for a large part today is just sort of demonstrate how we would use GitHub to take other people's code, make the copy of our code for ourselves, and then send changes back, right? For that main repository to be able to pull request into their code base so that everybody has the same files. And so that's going to be primarily what we do today. That'll be the bulk of our time together today, is just demonstrating that. Before we get to that, what I would like to do is just talk about the project again, which is the final project, and there are, check-ins across the way, or along the way rather. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thanks for joining me. Oops, I didn't want to do that yet. Hey, Ken. Yeah, I wanted to start off today just talking a little bit about the final project, just because there is a check-in that's due with Module 2. Just to get the group together and just select who's going to be the leader and maybe try to look at, who's going to do what. That's, kind of the goal for this one. I encourage you, if you haven't reached out yet, I encourage, to reach out to maybe one or two of your classmates, see if we can get the ball rolling. I've reached out to a couple people to try to get the ball rolling. Just remember, like we talked about at the end of the live last week, though, that if there are some people that don't quite live up to their role, we can figure things out, and I'm not going to let anybody fail the course because of the shortcomings of other people. So we're just, we're going to put that out there. We do have this group lab that's due with the current module. That's just basically getting everybody on the same page. Remember that the final project information is here. Since it's six people instead of 4, that means that 2 of these persons here will have 2 people doing them. And don't forget that I also have your My Group here. So if you want to use these tools here to communicate with your group mates, which is the entire class, you can use this to send out email to everybody, or schedule tasks or whatever you want to do here. Or you can also just do everything on GitHub, which is one of the things that we'll see today. But you're basically just making a website that is going to advertise our business administration operations management program, which I have linked here, with just some information there. So like, as you can see here, that's a pretty boring page. So the goal is to just try to make a more enticing page for them using the tools that we're talking about throughout the semester. And ideally, like, we'd like to do things just kind of as we're learning about them. So we have a few check-ins along the way just to make sure everybody's kind of, on a good path. But it's, we're gonna make sure that, everybody who wants to participate and do what they are supposed to do gets the proper credit for what is done. All right. So with that being said, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about Git. I'd like to just review a little bit, start off here, of the stuff that we talked about last time. So we started talking about Git, and we said that Git was basically a tool that we could use for version control. It is SCM software, which is source code management software. So Git is source code management. It's SCM. And one of the big things about Git is that everybody gets their own copies of the file. And everybody's copy is just as good as everybody else's copy, right? So one of the things that we'll see when we look at the GitHub demo here in just a few moments is kind of how that works, right? Because when I start to get on GitHub and work with other people's code, one of the things that you'll see is that, I take the code and I make a copy of it for myself. I do what we call forking it. I fork the code for myself so I can have my own copy of it. And then once I do that, I have a downstream version of that main code that I can clone to my machine, make changes to, push back up, and do everything, and then create pull requests from there. So when we get to our demonstration, that's going to be what we do today. We covered a lot of Git last time. We basically said, we have this certain set of commands that we will use every time, right? Things like git init to initialize Git in a folder, git add to add the files that are in that folder. And we can add one file at a time, but typically what I like to do is, if I'm doing file management, then all the files that I want to transfer are in the right folder anyway. So I will just do git add period to add all of the files that are in that particular folder to a stage. Then I make my commit with git commit, which creates a version of my code. And then we can use git log and git revert and different things to go backwards if we need to go back to a previous version of the code. And so one of the things that we said last week when we talked about Git is that you can use it locally, right? Like everything that's done is done locally, but you can also use it in conjunction with servers, right? Which is where GitHub comes in. And, like I mentioned, that's going to be the big focus of today is GitHub. So let's just do a little bit of talking about GitHub here. GitHub is a site for online storage of Git repositories. At the end of last week, I kind of gave you a sneak peek about what we'd be doing this week by taking a code file, taking some different things that we worked on during last week's live, and uploading them to GitHub via the git command. So we can do that like we did last time, or we can use other people's code that exists and make our own and collaborate, right? That's the big deal there. So GitHub is this remote repository for online storage of Git managed code. So Git itself is local. Git itself is on your local machine. GitHub is the server. All sorts of different source projects use it. One of the things that we'll look at the Linux kernel. The Python programming language has its own GitHub, to where you can see the code that was used to code the Python programming language. And it's free. Right? If you want to have open source projects where your code is public, it is free. You can push as much code to it as you want to. You can host as many static pages as you want to with it using GitHub Pages, which is something that we looked at last week, which we'll look at briefly again today. Or if you want to keep things private, like a lot of businesses would want to do, you can pay to have private projects, to have projects that are just for you and your collaborators. There are free private repos for educational use. They have a whole big suite of educational offerings at github.com/edu. So that's github.com/edu. Is their educational page, and so you can see all the things that they have to offer you as a student here. There's a student developer pack, which is what I'm talking about here for the private repositories. There are also a whole bunch of other things that you get by qualifying for this. So you get free GitHub Pro while you're a student. Those are those private repositories I was talking about. You get partner offers. So if there are, we can look at some of those here. There are some classes in there that you can take advantage of while you're a student. So you can kind of go through these and take advantage of some workshops and some different educational material that's in here that they have made available. They also have opportunities for student programs and what they call octernships, which are internships that are sort of coordinated through GitHub. So there are a lot of offerings for students while you're a student. You'll have your account. Ideally, you'll make it with your student email. Like one of the things that I have done, which you can kind of see here if you look here, you can tie multiple email addresses to a particular account. So like I have my college email address attached to this account, and I have a personal email address attached to this account. And so if you wanted to make sure you kept this after your college email is gone, you can just attach two different emails to it, which we can look at in the settings here, in the profile. But that way you can take advantage of all this education, student resources that they have available for you now. And when you're not a student anymore, when you graduate and that email goes dead eventually, you'd still have access to all your GitHubs because you'd have another account tied to it, which is pretty cool. If we look here and I look at my settings, so under my icon here, I go down to settings. We have emails here, and this is where I can add emails. And I can add as many emails as I want, dedicate them as a primary or a backup. It will ask you to verify them to make sure that you own the email address that you're trying to add. You can also choose to keep your email addresses private if you'd like to do that. And that's again under your settings. So we go to drop down, settings, and then emails. And there are some other settings in here you might want to go through and look at and play with. You might want to change your username. That's under account. There are different looks to GitHub. So you might want to go through and change your look for GitHub. Be something that you prefer. Accessibility settings for motion and links and various commands and things of that nature. I just encourage you all to kind of go through the settings, just read through them, and make your GitHub suit your needs. Right, like mine's set up to suit my needs. You'd want to set yours up to suit your needs. And then when you're done, after you're logged in, you'd have a dashboard that looks something like this. And yours wouldn't have repositories on the left-hand side here yet because you haven't really used your GitHub yet, but you'd have a lot of information here in the middle. These are trending repositories. We can actually, hide these, show less of them if we want to. And we can see, different things about things that we've been working on. Maybe some events and workshops they have coming up. Right, but the big thing here is going to be our repositories and also this search bar. And this search bar here actually lets you search for the entirety of GitHub, right? So like one of the things that I like back in the spring in the social media class, we did a live class where I talked about the Twitter algorithm because it had been recently released. So we came and we looked at the Twitter algorithm on GitHub. And, you can also look at things like if I just searched Linux kernel in here, we can search for that. And we can see this is Linus Torvalds GitHub here with the Linux kernel in it. And so this is the kernel that's at the core of the operating system for Linux. And this is actually a really good one that we can look at some of the other GitHub features with, right? Because we can see there's been 1,215,150 commits. And these commits are changes that people have made that get accepted by the owners of the repository. And so one of the things that we'll look at here is that when we go to make changes on some code, we will start out by forking it. And we can see here for the Linux kernel, we have 49,800 forks. And that's other people who have made their own copy of this code that they can work on. And of those people who have made their own copy of the code that they can work on, there are 1,215,150 people who have contributed code that has been implemented. Or, well, there's been, I guess the better way to say that is there's been code implemented 1,215,150 times from those 49,800 people. And if I click on these commits here, this is actually one of the things that makes this really useful for me as an instructor in a course. Right? Because we can see like these ones at the top here, the ones that were done the most recently, which are today. they were all done by Linus Torvalds, right, who is the owner of the repository. And we can zoom in a little bit here so we can see this a little bit better. They were all done by Linus Torvalds. Right, but if we see these commits here, we can see different people here. Fluke Jones authored, and this other person committed yesterday. And so when you create a pull or a pull request, you get shown in here as the person who authored that change. And then whoever owns the repository commits your code. So I can actually see as you all are going through and adding your different bits of code to the final project, when I look at this commit log, I can actually see what you committed, how much you committed, when you committed, how often you committed or sent code. Because if we click on one of these, we can actually see the details of this commit and what was written. So if we click on the ID here for this commit, we can see that there was code that really didn't exist that was added in here. So there's a bunch of new code that was added here in this commit. And you can make a bunch of little commits on your machine so you're not doing as much work, but only push to the repository when you have enough that you're comfortable with. So, like we were doing last week when I was local, I can make as many commits and save as many states as I want locally, but then I only push when I'm ready to send a bunch of code up, which is pretty cool, right? And so locally, this person here, for example, could have made a bunch of little commits so they could test their code along the way and do different things. And then finally, when they have a bunch of stuff here that they can send up, they can send it up. And they can push it. And so let's go through the process of how we would actually do this. So one of the things that we did last week was we talked about creating a repo and how we would create a new repo. And we'll do that again at the end today because I want to make one that you all can practice with. Because I'll tell you, after doing this demonstration for a few years, it's getting harder and harder for me to find ones that I can demonstrate on, right? Because all the ones that are open and available for practice, I'm kind of going through them. Right, so I found this one here that's a publicly available one that is intended for just kind of practicing the process. And so you can see they have a master branch. There's one branch. There's 146 commits. We can see all the commits here that were made by different people. And we can kind of talk about how we would deal with open source software while we are talking about this, right? Because I have contributed to software before. If we look at my profile here, you can see I've got a few little badges here from some different projects that I have sent code to. So I have sent code to open source projects before that was PR'd or pull requested into the code base. And so typically, if you wanted to do that, the place you would start here would be on the Issues tab. Right, we've got this Issues tab here. These are bugs or feature requests that people have found with the software. Right, so could be a bug, could be a feature request. In this case, they're all kind of silly because this one's just for practice, right, where people have kind of opened issues. But you can see that I can raise a new issue if I want to. I can click this new issue button here. I can give it a title. I can add my comment. We can write, this is a test issue. Here's the bug. Right. And I can submit the issue. And so now when we look at the issues, I have a test issue here that I've opened. I can choose to close this issue and say it's done, which we'll do that when we're all said and done here. But the owner of a repository can also assign an issue to someone, right? So we might not be able to look at it in this one, but I think we can look at it in a different one. Let's look at it in Gray Ghost Visuals, Practice Git here. I can't use this one because I've used this one before, although this is a really good one. They've also taken the opportunity to put all the commands and a bunch of things down in the README here for this repo. So I will add that link to when I send out the recording today. But if we look in their issues here, we can see that they have things that are tagged as enhancements or what have you. And if we look in one of these here, we can see this person here said, please assign this issue to me. And the owner assigned that issue to this person. And Gray Ghost is a little slow on taking care of PRs, right? I mean, they do it out of, they do it in their own free time just because they want to help people learn about Git. So this is also another good one that you can use to practice as well. But again, I am going to provide you all with one of mine that you can practice on. But you can see he actually merged my pull request from last fall recently. Or this was actually not from last fall. This was merged on October 7th, 2020. So that was the last time he's actually done a pull request merge on here. So he hasn't been around for a while. So if you use this for practice, just kind of understand that he probably won't merge your pull request. But we're going to use this one today, which is Nomad Coders Get Practice repository. And the first thing that I'm going to do to be able to take this code and use it as my own is I'm going to go up here to this fork button. I need to do this fork button because remember, with Git, everybody has their own copy of the code. And everybody's copy of the code is equally valid to everybody else's copy of the code. So I need to hit this fork button here. And that will give me a little dialog here to create a new fork. Now, Get Practice has already been used. So I need to come up with some kind of name. We'll call this Get Practice Nomad. And we're going to copy the master branch only, because the master branch is the one that has all of the final pushed code into it. If we wanted to, we could uncheck this to have all the branches, which depending on the repository that you might be using could be useful. Like I've seen stuff before that use different branches to put different information in. But typically, if it is a code-based, project-based GitHub, all of the good code is going to be on the master branch. So we can only worry about copying the master branch. And we're going to create our fork. And so that'll take a little bit of time, right? It'll take a few seconds, but then we'll have a copy of it. And you can see it's on my account here. There's my username. There's the name that I provided for it. And we can see here that it was forked from Nomad Coders /git-practice. And so we can see that it carries with it the commit log. So this commit log is the same as this commit log on the main repository here. Now we can also see that it has a sync fork button here. If I click that sync fork button, it says this branch is not behind the upstream Nomad Coders masters. And what that means is that the version that I have right here is the current version. If I had an older version, I could come here, click that sync fork button, and it would have a button to sync here. And it would update my code from that code. Now this contribute button is what we use to open up a pull request. We'll do that in a bit. The first thing that we need to do is we need to be able to pull this code down to our local machine, right? Because remember, all the Git stuff happens on our local machine. And work with it from there. Let's go to our project file that we were using last week, which is Web140 Fall FA. And actually, I want to use a different one for this one. So let me just create a new folder, because I've already initialized Git in that folder, so it'll be a little weird. So let me Git practice Fa23 here. And so now I have a Git folder here. And in here, I'm going to do what we talked about last week. I'm going to right click, select open the Git bash here. And so that way I have my Git bash window open in the proper drive. So one of the things that you'd want to do is you'd want to clone this project. Now we're just going to go ahead and try to clone it. So here on this green button here that says code, I can click that green button. I can see HTTPS here, and it gives me a URL. And I'm just going to click to copy that URL. And so the command I would want to run here to clone this code is going to be git clone, and then paste my URL in here. Didn't copy. Let's click it again to make sure it copies. There we go, copy. Git clone and paste. Now this probably won't work for a particular reason, but I want to show you the way that, the error message that it tells you, just so you know if you jump the gun and do this, you'll know what happened. Looks like it's just going to work, right? Which is good. So I can just clone straight into this folder. There were previous versions where you had to initialize Git in the folder before you could run it, but it looks like updated version, we're just running it now, which is great. And so if I look at my folder now, we can see there's my repo. Right there it is. And I can open that up and I can see the README and I can see everything I need. Now, one of the things to notice here is that when, if you remember back, when we initialized Git last week, it put the .git hidden folder in the root file that we initialized Git in, but we can see it's not here, right? It's not until we enter into Git practice Nomad that we see this Git file. So I will have to change directory to be in this named folder. So I'm going to go into the git-practice-nomad folder. Git-practice-nomad. And so now when I make my changes, I can push from here and we'll be good. And so this just has a markdown file readme, right? If we look here at what we have here, people have just been adding their names. So I'm going to add mine. I'm just going to open this in VS Code. And here's our markdown file. And this could be an HTML file. It could be a text file. It could be anything. So I'm just going to add my own line here. So that's a dash and a markdown for a bullet point. X in square brackets for a checkbox. And we'll just put Mr. Ramsey right in here. So now I've made a change to this file. And so now that I've made this change, I can send it back upstream to my repo the same way that we were doing things last week, right? So I'm going to get add period, get commit dash m added my name. And then since I already have the remote location from where I pulled it, right? That's the remote location. I can just push to that master branch. So I should just be able to push get push origin master. All right, since I cloned it, all of that origin stuff that we did last week, it already knows it. Right, so if I go back and look at my repo now, back on GitHub, right, notice that we're on mine, in my account. I refresh this page. There's my name added to the bottom. Now, if we go to the main one, it's not added there yet, right? Because it's added in mine. In order for it to get added to the main one, I have to make a pull request. If we look in the commits here, we can see there are 147 commits here. The most recent one is the one that I just did. Still only 146 here. So now what I want to do is I want to make sure my name that I just added to my own version of this code gets added to the main code, because that's the main one that's being used. That's the one that gets sent out. That's the working one. All right, so I'm going to go to, in order to do this, I'm going to go to the pull requests tab. And I'm going to click the big green button here, which says new pull request. And so I want to make a comparison of my master to the main master. I probably actually should have put that on another branch. We will... Let me remember. Because this is something that I'm not doing all the time, but it is something that I'm doing on occasion. So it does help. Oh, is that what I'm doing? No. Oh, it's too late in the day. I'm having a brain not working. Um, compare across forks. That's what I want to do. Duh. There is a compare across forks button. I want to find my fork. And there's the difference. You can see right here there's a link that says compare across forks. I will zoom into that. Skipping a step. And that's what allows me to compare this code to my forked code. And you can see once I do that, I can choose my fork. I can choose my branch. And you can see there's my commit. And I can create a pull request. Like so. And so what it's doing is it actually has an auto merge that can be done. Right? But if it's not able to auto merge, then it can only be able to be merged by the owner or the owners of the repository. So it tells me this branch has no conflicts, and only those with write access to the repository can merge the pull requests. So somebody else will have to come and merge my pull request. And when they do that, it'll add my commit in here as well. And so if you were the owner here, you would see the pull request show up in this window now. Or actually, you'd see it in this pull request window. And you'd have the button here. You would have a button here to merge the pull request if you were the owner or a collaborator, an official collaborator on the repo. And we can talk about how we can make people that in a moment. Or, well, I guess let's do that now. Right? Because I want to make a repo for you all. So let's make a new folder here. Let's call it Practice Fa23. And so this will be my practice repo that I use for to let you all get some opportunity to practice if you want. So let's open up VS Code here. And I'm just going to make a little index.html file just so we can go through and look at some different things too after we get it pushed up. So I'm going to open the folder, and I'm going to open that folder that I just created there. So that's in my E drive. That is in Get Practice, alphabetical order. Get Practice Fa23, Practice Fa23. And I'm just going to put an index.html in here. We'll put the little HTML skeleton in here. Change the title. And add a little hello world. H1, hello world. All right, so this is the file that I'm going to want to send up. One of the things that we looked at last week is that we actually have a terminal within Visual Studio Code that actually supports Git and GitHub. So I can go to terminal and new terminal. And we can see here that it opens in the folder. So I can run git init, git add period, git commit -m. And since this is my first commit, I'll just say initial commit as the message. And so now I have a commit on my local machine that I'm ready to push to GitHub. And so for this, we'd actually have to go to the GitHub side. I'm going to go back to my repositories page. So that's your repositories. Icon, your repositories. And I'm going to click new. I'm going to click the green button here that says new. And we're going to call this practice with this Fa23. And we're going to create a repository here. Now remember that when you create a new repository, it tells you the commands right here. So we did git init, we did git add, we just did add period instead of adding specific files. We did our commit. We don't have to change the branch. If you want to, you can run this to change the branch. If you don't change the branch, if you don't run this command here to change the branch, this final command would be git push origin master. But if you'd rather have it easier, you can just run all of these just as they're written here. So I can take this git remote add origin, paste it in here. So now it knows about my remote GitHub, and I can push git push origin. And since I didn't rename my branch to main, it's going to be master. And so now we can refresh that, and there's my index. And so you can come here and you can do the same type of stuff. It's open. You can go here, you can get this, you can clone it, so on and so, or you'd make the fork first and then you'd use that, but I can't fork my own, which is why I have to use somebody else's. I do want to look at some of the repository settings before we wrap up today, because some of these are going to be important to you for your final project. And so I'm going to give you this repo to practice with, this Gray Ghost visuals. So I would just give you this link. So you would just go to this link, github.com/DERamsey/practice with this. And so when I put out the, I'll put this out with the recording so you can have an easier time getting to this. But yeah, when you just go to this same page that I'm on here, except your fork button won't be grayed out. You can fork it onto yours and just do the same stuff that we just did with the other page. Clone it, pull it down, make your changes, get add period, get commit, whatever your message is, get push, and you're there. And then do the pull request. And then I can come in and approve it. And that would also give me the opportunity to make a short video showing you approving pull requests, which is tough if you've got nobody to work with you. But in the settings here, one of the things that you can do is you can add collaborators. So if I go to my settings for my repo, which is different from your personal settings, which are over here. These are your settings for your repo. You can add collaborators. So it wants me to log in again. I'm not going to do that here right now. But the reason that it wants you to re-authenticate there is because this is where you can add other people with write access to this repo. So if you want other people to be able to approve pull requests, you need to add them as a collaborator. To just send a pull request, you do not need to add them as a collaborator. You don't need to add anybody as a collaborator. You can send a request without being added as a collaborator, but if you want that person to have the ability to approve pull requests, do the administration tasks here, then you'd want to add them as a collaborator. The other cool thing here, really the only other thing that we particularly worry about for this course, is pages. GitHub Pages, which is on the settings. In the settings for the repo, there's a little pages link here on the left-hand side. If I click that, that gives me the ability to create a static website from code that I've put on GitHub. So I can have HTML, I can have CSS, I can have JavaScript. I can basically have whatever front-end code I want to have. And I can actually turn it into a live website by adding a pages page. So I would just go to this pages page, select deploy from a branch here, and select the branch that I want to deploy from, which is the master branch, and click save. And so it'll take a minute or two for it to enumerate and go live. But once it does, it'll actually give me a URL that will be a live website. That people can go and visit and see. Right, especially if you're just making something simple that people don't interact with, like a portfolio, or if there's some tools that you've made that only use front-end code, some informational pages, things that people don't, things that you don't need anything on the back end processing. GitHub Pages is actually a really good option to be able to host that code. And there we go, my site's live. So if I click on that link there, we should be able to see the hello world that we put in our code. And when I merge pull requests from you all, if any of you all are practicing it, you'll see that code show up on here too, which is pretty cool. And so now I've basically committed, we have the whole process here, a little bit out of order, but we have the whole process here kind of committed in a video, which is good. So you all can kind of go back and rewatch and, slow things down and pause along the way as we are, as you're trying to work things out yourself. We also have a couple opportunities for practice here, which, remember, again, I'm going to give you these links. And so to go here and to get this, you would just go to this link, click the fork, that'll copy it onto your own GitHub. On your own GitHub, you would take this code and copy the link that you get there. Then you can clone it. Then you can do everything that we did the first 30 minutes of the demo there where we were pulling our own stuff for me to do with, I really can't do it with my own code, but, it's something that, you have a couple opportunities to practice, and then as you're getting started working with your own stuff, the more we do it throughout the semester, the easier it'll become, right? And so that's why we do this module first. That way, all the other modules that we have after this, I ask you to turn in your code using GitHub. So that way, you're just getting more and more and more practice, right? Because this is one of those things where good practice goes a long way. And the more you practice and the more you do it, the easier it'll get for you. And so I think with that being said, I have covered everything I want to cover for today. So if anybody has any questions, we'll go ahead and take them. If you want to drop them in the YouTube chat, or I'm also monitoring Teams and email at this time if you don't want to put them in the YouTube chat. Anybody, we'll just hold for questions because I know there's a bit of a delay on the stream. So we'll just kind of hold a minute or two here for questions just in case anybody has them, and we will answer them to the best of our ability. All right, since I'm not really seeing anything come in here, we'll go ahead and stop here for today. If you're watching the recording or you think of a question later, feel free to send me an email or a Teams message, and we'll do the best we can to answer your questions. We'll send the link to my practice repo and this Gray Ghost visuals here so you can have another opportunity to practice and see all the information that they have included here. Out with the recording. But that's all that I have for you for today. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.